All right. Good morning, good afternoon. Let me just not block my own face here. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're tuning in from. Welcome back to another machine learning community stand up. I am your host, Luis, and with me today is Jake.
Huh?
All right. So thanks again for tuning in for another one of these. We're doing office hours today, which is basically it's a free for all for the most part. We're going to talk to you a little bit about some of the stuff that's happening in the community, some of the stuff that's happening around machine learning and .NET. And then after that, it's pretty much up to you. If you have any questions, anything that you want to talk about, we're pretty much here for you. So yeah. Before we get started, though, I just want to remind you that today's show is brought to you by the letter H, or H, for hyperparameter. So you might hear this term off being used often in, as it relates to machine learning. But what exactly does it mean? So hyperparameter essentially is just a parameter that influences or contributes to the learning process when you're training a machine learning model. To put it a little bit more concretely, it's like there's several algorithms and they are inputs that you provide that are sort of constraints that you place so that your model is able to train. Now, how you might think about this is, for example, k-means in clustering algorithms. You have the k-means. Your hyperparameter there is k, and with the k, you're basically telling the model as it trains, it's like, hey, I want you to split up all of or cluster or create n k amount of groups, right? So these are things that you're setting. Hyperparameters are things or parameters that you're setting ahead of time to help that training process. Another really good example is, for example, with deep learning, right? So let's say your a hyperparameter would be things like the learning rate or the step size, meaning how many steps the model should take in trying to find its objective. And to put it to plain words, let's think about it. If let's say you had an objective, right? And your objective was, like I told you, hey, your task or your objective is to count to count up to the number 500, right? And a hyperparameter or a constraint that I might put on that, or a guideline that I might give you as to how you might reach that objective is I can tell you, count by ones, right? So you might start 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth until you get to 500. Now you might imagine if you do that, it's going to take longer for you to reach that objective, right? But if I told you count by 10, then you say 10, 20, 30, you're going to get there faster. So you can see how hyperparameters could potentially influence how fast you train or how quickly you reach your objective. So yeah, that's basically hyperparameters. The one thing that I will also note is that they are not to be confused with parameters like the weights and or the coefficients, which are actually learned. Those are parameters as well that are part of the model, but those are actually derived or learned as the algorithm processes the data and finds what those parameters are versus hyperparameters, which are again just guidelines or constraints that you set on the training process that you know and set ahead of time.
I'm just going to jump in a little bit, Luis, here. One thing about hyperparameters is we, in our tooling side, try to help you figure out your hyperparameters. That's what all of our tooling inside of Visual Studio does. So if you go in and you try and train a machine learning model using Model Builder, what we're doing is we're running AutoML in the background, and we're trying to figure out the best parameters. So like Luis said, the parameters greatly change how the algorithms work that we try. And so we're just sort of searching, it's sort of like a fancy for loop over those hyperparameters to find the best set for your data.
Yeah, no, that's really, really good because yes, as Jake mentioned, right, the alternative there would be you literally writing a for loop and trying to find that. So AutoML tries to do that a little bit intelligent in a more intelligent manner rather than sort of by brute force. Although brute force is okay as well, but as you might imagine, that can also take more time.
It also gives us the slight transition, which is just that we're actually working on bringing the AutoML that we have in tooling into the framework so that you can directly access that fancy for loop, that all that technology that we've been trying to build, and we're going to try to bring that to you via code approach, so that you can do it via notebooks or your favorite code editor instead of relying on our Model Builder UI.
Yep, absolutely. And I think there's even something else that is coming along with that. Maybe we can chat about it later as well, which is that sweepable API, which does a lot of that hyperparameter selection. I see we have a few questions here. One is from Michael Powell, which is, are there closed or open loop feedback parameters? Could you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by that, Michael? I'm not quite sure I understand the question. But yeah, if you could just provide a little bit more details there, and we'd be happy to read that and try to answer that. Fuel asks, can ML.NET use ML to pick the best solution? ML.NET itself, probably not, but kind of what Jake was mentioning with the AutoML that's currently in the tooling, right, in Model Builder and the CLI. I think that there is does it use a specific type of search algorithm to try to find the best parameters? I think, does it do grid search or network architecture search? Do you know, Jake?
I don't know the details of it. We can actually have Cheyenne, or we can have Chi back on to tell us about it. But we are actually looking into a solution that tries to use ML, not necessarily to pick the best solution, but to pick the starting point that we search from. So if you think of the search space as being 10 dimensions big or something like that, for each of those variables, you have some starting point where you're going to try and pivot from to find the best set. And we're going to be training a model to figure out what the best starting point is based on properties of your data. So like whether or not you have category rows, whether or not what the range is of your values, all that sort of stuff. So we will be basically using a model to pick the starting point, which should speed up the AutoML process by not just starting at something we know won't work well.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, and okay, cool. And Michael, like I said, if you would like to provide more details, I'd be more than we'd be more than happy to help answer that question. Let's see here. Okay, so let's jump into, if there aren't any questions, and if you do have questions, feel free to post them in the chat. Let's jump into some of the community links. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and we can sort of go over those. Now, you can find the community links over at the URL is MLNet Standup 2022-02-16. So today's date. And we got a few things going on here. So one of them, we'll start off with this tweet here from Brent Lewis, which he's basically showing off a project that he built with Onyx and YOLO to do object detection, I believe. So in this case, these are all the sort of components that they're using here. It's using a Raspberry Pi with 4 gigs and a few other things there. And basically it's just doing some object detection there using the YOLO V5 model there. So pretty cool. Maybe at some time, Bryn, you can sort of come on and chat with us about some of these projects that you're doing with IoT and computer vision. Coming up in, I think, Friday. Yeah, it's happening on Friday. So there's this Practical ML, ML.NET user group, and they're essentially they host a series of events. They actually just had one, which we're going to go over in a little bit. But this one, it's going to be somebody's going to be joining. Miodrag is going to be joining to talk about how you can integrate scikit-learn machine learning models and ML.NET using Onyx. So again, if you're not familiar with Onyx, it's that open neural network exchange, and it's a way for you to train a model in one framework. In this case, I believe it probably is scikit-learn or vice versa. And then you can, if you convert it into this standard format, Onyx, you can then use the Onyx runtime to make predictions using another framework where the model wasn't trained in, right? So yeah, so it looks pretty interesting. So if you're interested, make sure to tune in. The last event that the Practical MLNet user group had was this face detection using C# and OpenCV Sharp. So here's a link to the video. You can go ahead and check it out if you're doing things like face detection or working on computer vision problems is something that you are, that interests you. So yeah, go ahead and check it out. This happened last month. Speaking of OpenCV, I'm just going to talk about this one specific blog post, but actually you can just go to Bruno's site and he has tons of stuff that's super interesting, and that it's all related to machine learning. Sometimes he uses C#, sometimes he uses Python, right? But again, at the end of the day, a lot of these concepts are just transferable. And in this case, what Bruno's doing is he's using OpenCV to blur, first of all, detect his face, and then he blurs it out, right? So you can see the use or how you might use this for example, using AI to preserve privacy, right? Or maybe you're doing some sort of video editing and you want to blur out people's faces or blur out logos or products or whatever it may be. So Bruno kind of shows you how to do that with OpenCV Sharp. I think it's OpenCV Sharp. Just OpenCV in general. Yep. So if you're interested in again, OpenCV computer vision type problems, you can go ahead and check out this post from Bruno. And again, just in general, he's got tons of other ones here as well, right? So detect and blur faces using cascades. In this case, it's using a DNN. Yeah. So make sure you give that a look. Speaking of Bruno as well, he did a series on the Microsoft Reactor sort of page or YouTube channel, where he talked about how you can use Azure Machine Learning and different types of train different types of computer vision models, whether that's with ML.NET, Azure ML. I think he also used computer custom vision, right, the cognitive service, and then using that inside of an Azure function application, right? So again, if you're looking to see the different options, since there's different options there for training computer vision models, depending on what your needs are, Bruno does a really good job of going and providing an overview of all of those. This one, actually, I'll skip for now. This one, a bit of a sort of shameless plug. If you're interested in Azure Container Apps and seeing how you can deploy ML.NET models to that, I did a Reactor session last month on that topic. So again, if you're interested in sort of learning a little bit more about that, you can check out this video here. If you're not familiar with Azure Container Apps, it's basically a service that's currently in preview from Azure. And the gist of it, it's basically like you get the best of serverless and you get the best of containers all into one. So you have custom, you can use containers and package your application using whatever tools, frameworks, libraries it is that you need. But then at the same time, you get that sort of zero, scale to zero, pay for what you're actually using, and basically scaling up as you need on demand. Fuel, I see a question there. Does it mean that you don't have to deal with K8s? That is basically what it means. As long as you have your container image in some, in some container registry, that be it be it Azure Container Registry, Docker Hub, or any other container registry, private container registry even. You can just point, as you're deploying it, you can just say like, hey, go grab this image from this container registry, and then it's going to pull down your image, and it's going to deploy for you. You also set things like what are the resource requirements that you want in terms of CPU and what are your requirements are for your, for your pod. And then everything else is just taken care of. It's just taken care of for you. So yeah, it's super easy. And yeah, I see. Plans to ignore K8s until it's just part of every cloud provider. Yeah, I mean, if you don't really want to deal with managing your own Kubernetes clusters, this is actually a really good approach that gives you the best of both, right? Like there's that sort of, again, like that sort of serverless-like way of sort of the uptime, right? In the sense that like if your compute isn't working, there's no request to it, right? It scales down to zero. But obviously, as you get more requests, it will scale up as you need it. And again, you don't have to change. You can take your existing ASP.NET web APIs and deploy them to this, and it'll just work. Yeah, so that's that. Praveen here has this really cool blog post. If you're into cricket, basically he's doing some cricket analysis prediction using ML.NET. So you can definitely take a look at that. I think he's using notebooks. Yeah, using notebooks, which we'll talk a little bit about later later today. Let's see here. Okay, so I think that basically covers everything that's happening within the community. As a reminder, if you hadn't seen the banners already here, it is the 20th anniversary of .NET. So 20 years ago, .NET was released. So yeah, it's super exciting. It's unbelievable that it's been 20 years. I personally haven't been part of all those 20 years, but yeah. So it's really exciting that how the community has grown, how the product and just the ecosystem has evolved. So it's super interesting. But something that may be interesting to you, other than that it's been 20 years, is .NET Preview 1. It sounds like it's going to be released this week. So if that's something that you were looking forward to, definitely stay tuned, because I think, like I said, it's happening this week, the first preview release. So yeah, make sure to check that out. Let's see here. I think that basically covers everything that I wanted to go through. There are a few things that we are going to want your sort of help and feedback on. So let me start off with this one here, which is actually let me zoom in just a little because it's kind of small. Basically just a short survey asking whether you use multiple programming languages in one file today. So you can think of that as using multiple languages in a script, or multiple languages in a Jupyter Notebook. However that may be, are you using multiple languages in a single file today? And if so, it's just literally one question, yes or no. And it's just going to help us, sort of inform, some of the features around notebooks, and among many other things, right? That involve having multiple languages. Fuel, I see, like C# and SQL. Yeah, potentially. That's something that would encompass that. If you haven't tried notebooks, .NET Interactive Notebooks, or .NET Notebooks, they also have that sort of polyglot experience where you can not only have .NET, but you can also have JavaScript, SQL, and I think PowerShell as well. So you can really combine, mix and match your languages so that everything's sort of in one file, right? So yeah. So go ahead and this is all going to be in the community links, by the way. So, you don't have to sort of note anything down. You can just go to the community links and you can find it here in these Qualtrics survey forms. Speaking of .NET Interactive and .NET Notebooks, .NET Interactive is looking for a new name. So put on your creative brainstorming hats on and provide three options for what do you think that .NET Interactive should be renamed to, right? If you're not familiar with .NET Interactive, it's just this sort of ecosystem of notebooks and interactive experiences for running .NET code inside of. There is some guidance here. Again, I just mentioned that .NET Interactive and .NET Notebooks in general have this sort of polyglot-like experience. So don't limit yourself to names that are associated with .NET .NET only. Don't limit yourself to only Jupyter or the notebook name of it. And definitely, again, going back to that multiple language support, that sort of polyglot-like experience, just feel free to lean into that one and feel free to lean into also the variable sharing support. Take those great names and go ahead and put them in this form and provide the team with feedback, because they definitely want to hear from you what all these should be called.
One thing I want to add is .NET Interactive is sort of like the engine that powers some other experiences, right? So it's not necessarily notebooks themselves, but it is the engine that actually powers the notebook experience inside of Visual Studio. The VS Notebooks, I think we also have a link in the community links for the VS Notebook editor. But also the VS Code .NET Notebooks can also be powered by this .NET Interactive. So it's sort of the kernel, the engine that we send code to and get the outputs from. And like this describes, it's polyglot. It supports a lot of languages. So yeah, we're looking for a new name, and it's not just .NET. So that's part of the reason I think why they're looking for a new name.
I would agree with that. That would be a really good name. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but I actually like that. Especially this multi-language support aspect of it, and that it's just this core engine that runs across. It feels like magic to me, right? So yeah, maybe that might be the future name. So go ahead and put that one into the options here, this form. Let's see. There's one last survey, and this one is around. It's around object detection. So, excuse me, if you're doing object detection currently just in general, right? Not necessarily specific to ML.NET or .NET in general. Just if you're doing object detection, there's typically some common formats that that people use to annotate their images. So one of those is Cocoa, right? And I think that one basically came from the Cocoa data set and just the annotation format there. There's also .json, which is just a JSON file. And typically it's used or created as part of, tagging with the VOD. I think the full name is Visual Object Tagging Tool. And that's the one that currently ML.NET uses inside of Model Builder to sort of the format that Model Builder uses for tagging your images. And then there's this other one called Pascal VOC that's also fairly popular. So this is just one question. So if you could take a minute or two to go ahead and give us feedback in terms of what you're using for your object detection scenarios. What are the data annotation formats that you're using? That would greatly help us in understanding sort of how we can better integrate or expand our current offerings. Right. Currently, as I mentioned in Model Builder, we're only using the VOD JSON format. But again, we're open to, based on your feedback, making some of these other ones available to you so that you can have some flexibility there instead of having to go and retag your images or convert them somehow. So yeah, let us know, and we'd be happy to hear your feedback there. Let's see. Okay. We talked about notebooks. So, Jake, I believe that there are some notebook related improvements that have been happening, right?
Yeah. So right now in the latest release, which I think released at the end of last month, we did some markdown improvements around theming and making sure that links work and that we just have high compatibility with the .NET notebooks that are currently available. And so that was kind of the last release was just sort of getting that feature parity up. In the the next release, we're working on keyboard shortcuts. During one of our recent user studies, we got a lot of feedback that it's important for us to match the VS Code experience or the Jupyter experience's shortcuts, and so we're working on adding those shortcuts so that you can shift enter whatever you want to do to be able to run your cells and add new cells and all that sort of stuff. I'm trying to think if there's anything else coming up on that. I think those are the main things.
Yeah. Awesome. And yeah, so the way that you can get it is obviously you can go through the marketplace here and click download, and that's going to download it to your system. And you can install it because it is a Visual Studio extension. You also have the option of just using the extension manager inside of Visual Studio to go ahead and install it as well. So yeah, make sure to check it out, try it out, and give us feedback. Let's ignore how many reviews are here, but currently it's got 5 stars. So yeah, leave feedback and leave reviews on how you're enjoying the experience and how we can better improve it. Let's see here. Okay, so let's move on to some of the things that are happening around the tooling in ML.NET and some of the releases that just happened. Last week, we went ahead and we had a release for Model Builder, and basically the main sort of highlight of that release was adding forecasting support for time series. So let me just kind of show you a little bit of what that looks like. So here I have just a class library project inside of Visual Studio. I go through my standard right click, add machine learning model process, which is going to create this mbconfig file. Now, the scenario which looks a bit off here. Not sure what happened. Let me switch back. Let me just close out of it for a sec. Save. Weird. I don't know if I'm like zooming in or something. Not sure what's happening there. But you can kind of see what's going on here. You can see that there's that forecasting scenario, and currently it's in preview. So again, give us feedback, try it out, and let us know what's working and what's not. I think we already had some issues and people raising issues on our repo, talking a little bit about some of the things that that they've found challenging or ways that we can improve it. In terms of the data, you still go through that same process of choosing an environment. Again, in this case, it's just local in terms of choosing the data. Here we have these product sales. Basically, we want to forecast product sales, and you can see here that it's all just daily sort of values in terms of product sales. We choose a label, which again, that's that value that we want to predict, but we also select the time series column or what we're going to be using as sort of the index to sort of identify what our what our time periods are. Some things that I will sort of call out here are, number one is you should probably have your data sorted, right? So maybe having like January 4th first versus January 1st and having that sort of time series out of order is definitely going to impact it's going to impact your predictions and your results, again, because there's not that sort of linear sort of time series. If it's out of order, it's gonna have a hard time finding that seasonality and that sort of continuity within your data. And then the other thing that I will sort of call out as you use your data is that you should probably have your data in even intervals. So what I mean by that is, for here, you see that it's in sequential order and it's on a daily basis, okay? And your period could be literally anything you want. It could be every second, every minute, whatever it may be, right? Just make sure that your data is in that sort of at consistent intervals, right? And that it's in order. But once you're done with that, the rest of the process is pretty much the same. You go through the set how long you want to train for. And also your horizon. Your horizon in this case is going to be how far out, how many periods into the future you want to forecast. And then after that, it's just, again, that same process that you might be familiar with in Model Builder. If we click predict here, you can see that you get both the product sales, which is the actual forecasted value, as well as the upper and lower bounds. And if you want to view that in a graph, you can do that here as well, right? Yeah, so that's basically the forecasting scenario inside of Model Builder. So go ahead and check it out, give us feedback, and yeah, we'd love to hear from you. close out of that for now and talk to you a little bit more about the other part of our tooling, which is the CLI. So we are nearing, possibly this week, we're going to be going and we're going to be releasing the new version of the CLI. All right. So there's a few things that are going to come with that. One is I can just kind of show you. So in terms of scenarios, and hopefully that's big enough. Yep. So in terms of scenarios, we used to have classification. So that's your standard classification scenario, spam, not spam, maybe classifying iris, flowers, things like that. You also have regression. So that's, maybe predicting house prices, predicting some numerical value. We had recommendation. So that's, like the name implies, doing recommendations. The two that are new here that are worth mentioning are image classification and forecasting. So with the CLI now, you're going to have the option of training machine learning, training image classification models using the CLI, and you can also train forecasting models using the CLI as well. So that's something new that's happening around the CLI. In addition to that, in addition to the scenarios, one of the other things that we're going to be adding is with the previous version, you only had we supported 3.1 .NET SDK 3.1. So with this new version, we're going to go ahead and support .NET 6, right, which is the current long-term release. Let me see. So with the .NET SDK, oh yes, the other thing that's going to be happening is we're going to have different packages or different tools depending on what runtime identifier you're using. So what I mean by that is, if you are using, if you have a Mac and you have x64 processor, right, you're going to have a different install command. Some of the things that enables is that, again, you can use it across different sort of chip architectures, including ARM devices. So you're going to be also able to use the ML.NET CLI on ARM devices and even M1 devices on the Mac. Right, so that's super exciting. The only caveat that I will raise there is that for ARM devices, you can't do image classification for training. Right, so that's the only caveat there. But other than that, for the most part, you're going to be able to use the CLI regardless of whether you're using x64 chip architectures or ARM architectures, and you're going to be able to use it like you currently can across Windows, Linux, and Mac. So yeah, that's basically what's happening in the tooling space. Let's see if I can switch back here to this here. Let me go to the machine learning repository and talk to you a little bit about what's happening on the framework side of things. We are basically full speed ahead. We're in the process of implementing or integrating TorchSharp into ML.NET. So part of that, the way that we're thinking now is to provide, just like you have I think it's called Score TensorFlow model, right? I think that's what it's called, the transform that allows you to use TensorFlow models inside of ML.NET applications. Having something along those lines, have some sort of TorchSharp transform that allows you to use weights and pre-trained weights from what's it called, PyTorch or Torch models, right? As well as providing some sort of ability for you to do something similar to what you can do now with the image classification, transformer or trainer, which allows you to do transfer learning to train your custom image classification models, doing something similar for NLP type scenarios and object detection scenarios. But again, we're still in the very early phases of that. And in the next few stand-ups, you're probably going to be hearing a little bit more about that. And you're going to be, we're going to want your feedback to tell us, if what's working and what's not. So stay tuned, and you're going to hear a little bit more about that from us. Hey, Sharafuddin, I see you have a question here. Can we use anonymous model Blazor C# with .NET 6? I haven't tried it myself. The answer I would say is don't know. I know you can use ML.NET inside of Blazor, ML.NET model inside of Blazor. Whether you can use an Onyx model with Blazor, I'm not. I don't know if you can. So yeah, I'm not sure. But if you do try it out, let us know how that works. We'd be happy to hear from you. And if it doesn't work, um, again, let us know, and we'll see if we can investigate it.
That's something that I'd like to look into too. I mean, that does fit with our plans with Onyx. We want that to be a path to being able to use your models, everywhere. That aligns with our strategy. So we should look into that. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see. I think it's in the pull request if I look in here. Yep. So there's a few things. Okay. Yeah. Let's make sure I wasn't on mute. There's a few things that are happening here. One is, again, that sweepable API that we were talking about a little bit earlier, and just having the ability to control search spaces for those hyperparameters that we were talking about before, among other things. So that's one of the sort of things or initiatives that are happening around the framework. And then the other one, which Jake sort of mentioned as well, which was having the ability to use to bring the AutoML that leverages the NNI and FLAML automated ML frameworks, and bringing them, bringing all that functionality and those features into the framework, so that there's parity across both the tooling as well as on the framework side. And you can, regardless of where you start, whether that's in the tooling API or vice versa, you have that ability to get that same functionality. So yeah. Okay, let's see. Tonium, let's see, weights from Torch into here. Interesting. Yeah. So yeah, we're really excited to enabling the Torch and Torch Sharp integrations, which if you're interested in just learning about Torch Sharp or aren't familiar with Torch Sharp in general, just go to Torch Sharp examples here. This is not the actual repo, this is just the examples. But if you're interested in learning about Torch Sharp, how it works, Torch Sharp is just this .NET library that allows you to interact with libtorch, which is the engine. It's .NET bindings that allow you to interact with libtorch, which is the engine behind PyTorch. And yeah, so we're really excited about that. And if you're interested in learning more how to use it, there's both C# and F# examples, depending on what which language you feel most comfortable in. You can go into them. There's a series of tutorials. I think there's actually a description here of what these are. Maybe no. Yeah, there it is. Right. So the first tutorial is setting things up. The other one talks to you about tensors, which is basically like the sort of the main data structure around these types of Torch Sharp in general, but just these types of models, using numerics, random numbers. If you have a GPU, how you can use CUDA to accelerate training, how you can build models, and again, using learning rate schedulers. So if that's something that you're interested in, check out the Torch Sharp examples repo, and you're going to find tons of examples there as well.
One thing I wanted to add on this too is for people that don't necessarily want to dive into Torch Sharp code, what this is ultimately going to enable us to do is offer you a local version of object detection training. Right now, we only have object detection training in Azure. So we'll offer like a transfer learning approach, which I guess Luis talked about a little bit earlier, a transfer learning approach for object detection from Model Builder, from our like the AutoML that we're going to offer in the framework as well. And then similarly, we're going to be offering NLP, which I think Luis also mentioned. People that aren't familiar with NLP, like right now, we have classification in Model Builder, but it doesn't work very well if you have free-form text. NLP is going to allow us to do things like classification, but do it better for free-form text. So like if you trained a model previously with ML.NET, something like passing in a GitHub issue text and try to do it to predict classification, it might not perform so well. But once we have NLP, it should perform way better. So yeah, stay tuned.
Yeah, for sure. And I see some questions coming in here. So Bina here asks, when are we getting idiomatic Torch Sharp? Can you clarify a little bit what you mean by that, Obina? By idiomatic, do you mean idiomatic as in Torch Sharp looks like PyTorch, or Torch Sharp looks like .NET? I also see we have a question here from Sharafudin. So Onyx model is a JavaScript library, right? Most of them using React, but Microsoft using Blazor, C# instead of using JavaScript. That's the reason I want to use Blazor. Yep. So Onyx models are not a JavaScript library. Onyx models are just like a format to describe the different operations and nodes. And nodes using the standard format, right? So it's agnostic of what you use it on. There is the Onyx runtime, which it does have a JavaScript library for interacting with it, but you also have a C#. I think it has C++. There's various languages that you can use the Onyx runtime with, right? C# being one of those. So yeah, you could, and actually that's what ML.NET uses for scoring or making predictions with Onyx models. It uses the C# sort of SDK or library for the .NET library for the Onyx runtime, right? I forget exactly what about it. If I remember correctly, there were some issues with it before and you couldn't do it. But again, I haven't tried recently, so I couldn't tell you whether that's possible now. But in terms of being able to use Onyx models with .NET, you certainly can. And you can definitely try it out with Onyx. But again, like I said, your mileage may vary. I personally can't tell you whether it works or not. So yeah, like I said, I would try it out. Try using either ML.NET, or you could use the Onyx runtime directly. Basically, what ML.NET gives you is it gives you a much simpler wrapper around the Onyx runtime library when you're making predictions. So that's kind of like the difference whether you use the actual Onyx runtime SDK or library, or whether you use ML.NET. But at the end of the day, they both basically work the same way. So I definitely encourage you to try it out and let us know how it works, especially now with .NET 6. Let's see. So I see. So naming conventions. I'd be interested, and you can actually go over to the TorchSharp repo as well. And if you haven't raised an issue or commented on it, I would encourage you to sort of talk to it a little bit more there, Obina, in terms of what you're referring to in terms of like having more C# like. So we had Nicholas on in the show. So if you haven't seen some more previews, you can probably check out some of the recordings. But we had Nicholas, who is one of the main contributors to this TorchSharp project, and that's something that he talked about when he came on and talked to us on the stand-up about TorchSharp and some of the plans happening there. Which is, if you go now, and I assume that that's kind of where you're bringing this up, Obina, around sort of more idiomatic TorchSharp, is that if you look at it now, actually, I probably should have left it in the examples to kind of illustrate the point here. If I go over to, for example, C# and let's do tutorial 1. So one of the things that you'll probably see, maybe not this one, go to tutorial 4, is that TorchSharp looks very Pythonic, right? And not very .NET-like, right? From my understanding, the reasoning behind that, or the decision behind that, was because you can take advantage and leverage, and for the most part, do like a copy and paste. If you are looking on, you're looking for examples like, how do I train this model with PyTorch? How do I train this model? How do I perform this operation with PyTorch? It, for the most part, will be very easy to go from Python, PyTorch to TorchSharp, and you can, for the most part, copy and paste the code, and it will work, right? And if you look through these samples, it's going to look very much that way. That being said, though, one of the things that we're trying to sort of do with ML.NET is sort of provide you more of that .NET-like experience for helping you build these TorchSharp models, right? So yeah, so that's, I guess that's the extent of what I can comment on it based on my understanding of why TorchSharp looks the way that it does, and some of the things that we're doing to make it feel like .NET in ML.NET, right? But beyond that, yeah, if you have additional questions, I would definitely encourage you to sort of post in the TorchSharp repo, and yeah, chat there.
Yeah, just to add, I mean, similar to what you're saying, part of the motivation for keeping the Python-like syntax is really so that you can leverage all the examples that are out there for PyTorch already, right? We wanted to make it easy so that if you already have PyTorch code, like say you're a .NET shop and have like a data science group, and you want to be able to work together, we didn't want it to have to be, constantly going through and just changing, letter formats or like how you're calling into or initializing classes and stuff. We kind of kept things more like functions, less, constructors, which you might be used to, just to make it really easy to copy and paste. So it wasn't sort of that painful process of converting everything over to Torch Sharp. So hopefully it should be very easy. And so if it isn't, we'd love to hear your feedback on how you want to work. And if you can't bring things over easily, let us know. We'd love to have that feedback. Like Luis touched on, the layer that we're planning on making things .NET like is in ML.NET. So if you have feedback in what you want at that layer, if you want to be able to do lower level things like you would do in Torch Sharp in ML.NET or exposed in ML.NET some way, we're happy to take feedback there and iterate on things.
Yep, totally. Yeah, so definitely go check it out. Provide that feedback on both the Torch Sharp as well as the the ML.NET repo, especially now, right? Because right now we're sort of in those initial phases where we are starting that implementation of that integration with Torch Sharp. So yeah, let us know. I would be happy to sort of respond and take that feedback into consideration. Let's see. Okay, so I don't know if there's any questions, but yeah, at this point, it's basically it's open for you guys if you have any questions, and if not, then we can also call it early. We've got about 15 minutes left here. So yeah.
Regarding I guess I can show it here. Regarding OpenCV Sharp, if there was a good discussion there, with the community, please include a link and we'll check it out. I'd love to read the context there. I'm not sure if it parallels as well as Torch Sharp and PyTorch. I'm not sure if there's a equivalent Python or what the story was there, but I'd love to learn the history.
Yep, totally. Yep. Okay, so we'll just give it a few more minutes here. Let me see, just check that I didn't miss any questions. So we addressed Blazor, Onyx, and yeah, I think we pretty much got most of the questions there. Yeah. So again, we're oh, there's actually one more one more feedback survey that I forgot to mention as well. Let me go over to the machine learning repo here, and I'll paste this one into the chat as well. So there's this community survey, and I'll bring this up. So I'll paste it into the chat. And basically, so this is not ML.NET only. This is actually applies to many of the other repos that you may have worked with, open source repos. For some reason, it's not opening. I think it's remembering my state that I started filling this out in. But you're basically going to be able to tell us about your experience, like if you have opened issues, if you have created PRs, if you've done anything inside of these open source repos, and you just like to provide us with your experience or some feedback on how we can improve. Definitely go ahead and check out this survey and yeah, just let us know how we're doing. So yeah. See, we have this one from Mohammed. What's a better way to start with .NET? There's actually, if you go to the .NET, I think .NET/learn. Yep. So if you go to .NET/learn, there's actually tons of getting started tutorials and a lot of really good sort of guides on how you can get started and learning materials for basically all of the different scenarios that you're looking to get started with. So I would encourage you to check that out. Yeah, I mean, I think that actually brings up a really good question, and something that I think would be really good to have on this, or ask here in this forum, which is the idea of what do you folks think about notebooks in sort of documentation, in the official documentation? What does something like that, what would an experience like that look like for you, and how would you best learn from those experiences if you had this interactive um, format? So feel free to post that in the chat, and we'd be happy to have that discussion. I don't know, Jake, if you had anything else to add to that.
A couple things. One, I pasted in a link for the C# notebooks as far as getting started with .NET. We've created sort of like these getting started notebooks. There's also tutorials associated with them, like videos you can watch. And so you can choose your method. You can either watch the videos or check out the notebooks. I love notebooks as a playground to learn and try out new things. So I'd highly recommend trying that. I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh, the other question I was gonna raise to folks is, how are you connecting your data to your models? One problem that we're hoping to help solve is connecting your data. I think it's unrealistic that we expect you to give us a CSV or TSV that's perfectly clean and has all the missing values replaced and all that sort of stuff. So what is your process for cleaning that data, connecting to the data, your retraining, stuff like that? We'd love to learn. We're hoping to help the community, have a sort of a standard or a recommended approach. And so we'd love to learn what you're doing and see if we can learn from what you've already been doing.
Awesome. Yeah, I see that there's a lot of thumbs up for using them for learning and running code samples. Philip, here, I see you had a comment. Something would be nice to be able to use them without any Python dependencies. I believe with Interactive, that's the case, right, Jake? There is zero dependency on Python. So
I'd have to double check the VS Code one. I can't remember if that needs the Jupyter extension or not, which might come with some Python dependencies. But the notebook experience that's inside of Visual Studio doesn't have any Python dependencies. So you just install the notebook editor extension. I can paste a link to that as well. I think it is in the community links, but I'll paste it. And so if you start from Visual Studio, there'll be no Python dependencies. You just do your I think it's $i references, and it doesn't. VS does not need Jupyter. VS Code might.
Yep. Yeah, that's a really, really good distinction there. See, I know there's another question here okay, yeah, so from Richard, is there any NLP libraries in C#? Maybe. That's a really good question. I know there are some. I've used them a bit, but I actually don't have tons of experience to be able to tell you which one you might choose. I think that it might depend on your use case. There's one called let's see if I go to Stanford NLP, I believe it's called. Maybe it's in NuGet. Let's see, NuGet.org.
Well, you're finding that I can kind of. So we are planning on bringing some NLP things like BERT to ML.net. We're going to offer transfer learning and work with a few different problems like classification. For NLP, I'm curious, what type of problems are you trying to solve? Like, do you want classification, or what is the type of problem you're trying to solve? Let us know, and we can try to make sure that that's included with our upcoming NLP integration.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think feedback there is super crucial to us learning a little bit more about some of where we should focus our efforts. We know in general there's the classification aspect of it, right? But beyond that, just letting us know what it is that you're trying to do would greatly inform and help us focus our efforts. There's also this other one. So I pasted into the chat there. There's the StanfordNLP.net, which is basically, I think StanfordNLP is a Java library, but StanfordNLP.net is the .NET sort of equivalent or the bindings. I think that you can use Valpal Wabbit for some NLP tasks. So that one might be something to want to look into. And it does have C#. You might have seen Python here, but it does have some C# bindings as well. So yeah, those are the two that I know of off the top of my head. But yeah. Let's see here. Go through the questions. Autonium, that's really good feedback. Tools to clean messy CSVs would be great. What I guess as a follow-up question to that, Autonium, what are you using now to clean your CSVs, and what are you using for your data prep? Let us know, and if we haven't heard of them, or we'd be happy to look into them. Let me see. There was something else. DF. Okay, so the problem with notebooks is you can't put that to production. Yeah, that's a really good point. So, for example, like with Python, right? Like you can do, or sorry, not with Python, with Jupyter, but I guess Python. You can, export to .py script, for example, right? So, I guess the question for you, Diego, would be like, is that something that you'd be interested in for .NET? And if so, what would that look like for you? Of basically taking a notebook, .NET notebook, and making it production ready.
We do have a lot of ideas in this space of like how we can potentially help here. But yeah, giving us the feedback of what your ideas are, that would definitely help. I mean, we can theoretically take your notebook and generate a CS proj from it, and pull out all those code blocks into classes and whatnot. But I'm not sure if that's necessarily what you would want versus you sort of manually doing it yourself. They're kind of different experiences, right? Like when you're in a notebook, you're experimenting, you're looking at graphs, you kind of want the full picture. But once you're deploying, you might only want a small section of it, right? You might only want the consumption. And so we're conflicted with what the best approach might be. Like, do you actually want to export as a project and get all those graphs and all that sort of stuff in some way? Or do you just want some sections of it in your notebook? And so right now you're right, it's a manual process, and we're not really sure if it's a something that we can automate and do really well. But if you have ideas, let us know.
Yeah, totally. Let's see here. I think it's related to the sort of the going to production question or comment. Fuel says that notebooks and Databricks you can schedule, right? Yeah, I mean, we'd love to hear a little bit more, Fuel, if that's something that you're doing, right? How you're going about it, and I would assume that you're using Databricks for your data, your ETL type jobs, and getting your data ready for some sort of either training process or as part of some sort of other downstream, data analytics or insights process. Yeah, so let us know, Fuel, how you're using that, and your process in general, and what would you like to see in terms of .NET, and how we can help you do those same things with .NET. Yeah, let's see. Faith asks, can you talk a little bit more about ML system design? Could you be a little bit more specific, Faith? I have an idea of where you're sort of like what you are referring to there, but if it's such a wide or like a very broad topic, that if there's anything in particular, we can sort of chat about that. All right, COBOL apps. That's interesting. I'd be interested in knowing, Fuel, did you use .NET for Spark, by the way, for your Spark needs, or were you using the Scala / PySpark version of Spark? Because so just to follow up on that a little bit, right? Like for example, with Synapse ML, if you're not familiar with Synapse, it's this offering from Azure that lets you sort of set up your Spark or SQL clusters. But one of the really cool things is that it also has the .NET for Apache Spark sort of worker, and you can also use notebooks instead of Synapse, and basically just do everything in .NET, do everything in notebooks within that sort of cloud Spark like environment. So yeah, I'd be interested in learning a little bit more if you use .NET for Spark, and if so, what was your experience? Let's see here. Let's see. Gannett, I think that you're referring to there as like a use case, or what you would use NLP for, which is to scan a folder for specific words with AI. Yeah, I mean, sometimes, it depends on how sophisticated you want to get, but would think that for that one, you could have some sort of shell script or something that does that for you, right? I think that's always like a really interesting question to ask yourself, right? I know that definitely like AI and ML have definitely, there's a hype around it, right? But oftentimes when you're starting out, right, like one of those questions that you want to ask yourself is like, do I even need AI to accomplish this task? And a lot of times you can just start with some heuristic and it will work well enough. And then if that's not working anymore, then perhaps considering AI might be a good way to go about it. So there's probably ways that you could do that, Gannett. But maybe start off without AI and see how that goes. Okay, let's see. So I think this is probably going to be one of the last questions here. So are there any more C# language specification changes or extensions in the near future that we need to be aware of in order to take advantage of its benefits related to ML? As far as the language, we sort of use what's there, right? I think for example, for the templates that we're generating in terms of from Model Builder, we're using the .NET 6 style templates which use global usings and things like that. So we will use whatever is there downstream, but in terms of us like looking to get the latest and greatest features that C# offers you, where it makes sense, we're gonna obviously take advantage of them, but it's not something that we're paying really close attention to. And Jake, I don't know if you maybe have anything to add in terms of extensions or things to look out for that are coming for machine learning related tasks.
Trying to think. No, I don't think so. I mean, we're definitely experimenting a bit with the notebook extension. So please go and try it out. We're also, like I said earlier, we're pulling our AutoML out of our tooling and bringing it into our framework. Part of that effort is making it so that you can get the full end-to-end training experience, like do your data prep, do your training, do your analysis and evaluation of your model all in one notebook. And so one of our first steps in doing that is making it so you can actually use AutoML so that you don't have to do the hyperparameter stuff. Yeah, somebody mentioned data frame. We are, as part of that effort, we're gonna see if there's any gaps in our data frame. Becca from our team is already investigating, what people usually do with data prep and data evaluation and pre-processing before going into their model training, and seeing if we can offer good examples in notebooks. So we're definitely have a lot up and coming in terms of notebooks. And I guess as my last comment here, if you have any notebooks that you're already using, that you've sort of done the end-to-end in, share them with us. We'd love to see what notebooks you're using, so that we can better the notebooks that we generate in Model Builder, or better the examples that we're going to create in notebooks as well. So we want to make sure that they work as well as they can.
For sure, yeah. I just want to call out two things before we drop off here. One is thanks, Fuel, for providing that sort of insight into some of the things you were using, AWS and using Spark with Scala. So that's super helpful in understanding how you're using it. And Faith, I apologize that we ran out of time here, but in terms of ML systems design, there is a course I think from Stanford called I think it's called the ML System Consortium. I don't know if it's consortium or seminar, something like that. Look it up. It's from Stanford. And it basically goes through all that process, what things that you should think about in terms of designing production systems, like monitoring, thinking about things like data drift, really what it means to get those feedback loops so that your model can learn about what's going right, what's going wrong, things like that. I definitely encourage you to check that out. So again, that's from Stanford, the ML Systems. Again, I forget if it's forum or something like that. Just look for ML Sys Stanford, and you should probably find it. And I think that's a really good resource to look into. Other than that, just want to thank you guys for tuning in and just chatting with us, having this conversation. We'll do this again in 2 weeks. We'll see if we have a guest. If not, maybe in a month we'll have somebody, or we'll do office hours, whatever it is. Again, we just want to have this type have this forum for you to ask questions and to just communicate with you on what's upcoming in ML.net and just .net in general. Fuel, short answer there. It does support Delta Lake, as far as I know. So yes, it does. And yeah, so with that, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you either in 2 weeks or a month. So take care. Bye.